when you start off and you're looking to expand, I like to keep a blank piece of paper and say, let's find where the right market is. Let's not start with preconceptions. Let's figure out where the money is for your product. And it's almost never where you think it's going to be, right?
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Growth and Scaling Podcast. We have got with us a master guru, international salesman of mystery. Zach, would you please tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. So basically, I help people with their international sales growth. And I do it in a bunch of different ways, but pretty much everything I do is about getting international sales growth for companies. And that's a fantastic way to scale up, whether you're a startup or whether you're a mid-sized manufacturing company.
Right. I was gonna say, is that kind of your avatar? Is it kind of that manufacturing? They got product they've been selling in America and wanting to get it out in the world? Is that who you're looking for?
Yeah, my sweet spot. What I really, I'll tell you what. When you take a company, let's say you take a company and it's selling, $100 million a year.
Yeah.
So maybe that company is worth $250, $300 million, right? Now, if they add $10 million of domestic sales, they're not going to add a lot to the value of the company.
No.
But if they add $10 million of international sales, now they're selling in 25 countries, they're probably going to add $100 million, $150 million to the value of that company, right?
Smart.
Because now they're a global player.
Smart.
And you think about all these companies around where they were founded after World War II or around World War II. They're manufacturing some type of widget. They're not not a sexy product, and now they're third generation, right? And the grandson of the founder is saying, okay, do I want to leave this to my kids or do I want to sell the company?
Totally.
And a little push, 3 to 5 years of building up your international sales, you might add $100 million to the value of the company. And
Smart.
that's my sweet spot.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And is there a part of the world that you feel like you're more ready to prepare to kind of bring them into? Are you talking Europe, South America, Asia? What are you looking at?
Not really. What I did when I was in my 20s was I spent about 25 years as an expat living abroad.
Cool.
And in my 20s, I shifted around being a regional manager in different places because I sort of knew where I wanted to be at 35. And I thought, if I've been a regional manager in 5 or 6 regions, it's really going to position me well. And I chase the money, right? So very often you talk to somebody and he goes, well, I'm a Japan expert. I will help you get into Japan.
Yeah.
Well, maybe Japan isn't the right market, right? Or maybe Mexico isn't the right market. So when you start off and you're looking to expand, I like to keep a blank piece of paper and say, let's find where the right market is. Let's not start with preconceptions. Let's figure out where the money is for your product. And it's almost never where you think it's going to be, right? When I talk to somebody and he says, I'm selling in France and Italy and Japan, I usually think, okay, you've made a mistake someplace because you've gone to the markets that your wife wants to go on vacation to, right?
I love it.
If you come to me and you say, I'm selling in Pakistan and Nigeria and Italy,
right?
Then I'm going to say, okay, you probably ended up in those because there's a really good reason you're in those markets.
Totally.
And that's what I do is I figure out those type of things.
That's hilarious. Yeah, no, I can see immediately the product fit for this because there are so many companies that, to your point, they want to exit. They don't know how to increase the valuation that much more with the time they want to exit. And so this is an amazing idea. It's a great concept. I know you're not the only one doing it, but you're the first one on the show that's done this. And so
I'm almost the only one doing it that I know of in the configuration I do, right? A lot of people, you get a lot of people who are like ex-diplomats or who are like professors of anthropology or whatever. I spent 35 years as a frontline sales manager. Right. And so I think that I'm the only person in my place that I know of. But there's plenty of room. I mean, there are thousands of American companies that could be selling more.
Yeah.
And about 80% of U.S. companies that try to sell outside of North America give up after 2 years.
Interesting.
Right? Which is amazing because we are only about 6% of the world market. There's so much market out there.
Right.
If you can sell something well in the U.S., if you have 25% market share in the U.S., I can probably sell you in 15, 20 countries, right? We can easily add 10, 15% of your sales because you obviously have a good product. There will be somebody who will buy it from you. You just have to figure out how to do it. And people give up before they figure that out.
Not to mention, there's a lot of people from outside of the U.S. that are willing to invest in bringing you into these countries, right?
Oh, yeah. Because there are people who that's how they make their living, right? They want to represent you.
Right.
But that, I'll tell you what, that's the trick is, I'll talk to people and they'll say, well, I met this guy and he's the nephew of the prince and he'll be fantastic.
Right.
So I signed an agreement and I'm giving him 20 years exclusive rights to my product, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, does he have a sales organization? What do you know about him? He said, well, he said he's the nephew of the prince. He must be good, right? And you get that a lot. So, you got to be your primary tool for expansion is the quality of your distributors.
Agreed.
And, what happens is I always say, let's say it was critical to you to scale up your manufacturing and you needed to hire a good manufacturing engineer to run your production facility. Right? Now, somebody walks in off the street and says, hey, I'd like to be your production manufacturer. And you go, sure, you know what? Try it out for a few years and then we'll see, right? You never do that.
No.
But if somebody walks up to you at a trade show and says, hey, I want to be your distributor in Germany, very often people will say, hey, great, just sign here. I'll make you my distributor for 2 years. We'll see how it goes.
Right.
And if you're good, we'll keep it up. And I always say you got to work with intent. You have to say, first of all, what are the markets I want to go into?
Right.
What does that distributor look like?
Right.
And then you find that distributor in that market. You don't let somebody else run your strategy.
Totally agree.
Very often I talk to companies and they say, well, yeah, I'm selling in Bangladesh. It's really not profitable, but this guy walked up to me at a trade show. He wanted to be by a distributor. He bought 10 units and I have a 7-year warranty. So now I'm sending somebody to Bangladesh twice a year and I've lost, $20,000 off of over what I sold for, servicing the products. Right. And it happens a lot, Yeah,
that's a really crappy problem to have, and it's one thing to have a prince who actually I own a distribution of food products in this region of Asia. That's a different story, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I like to look, and one of the things I do for people is I'll go in and I'll really dig into the distributor capabilities, their bandwidth, how competent they are, how many salespeople they have, what we expect from that market, because there might be a market like Dubai that you can say, okay, for my product, I only need 1 salesperson, but for Saudi Arabia, I need 3 salespeople, right? So the question is, are you balancing that out? And that's sort of the type of thing I do for people that they typically can't do themselves, don't know how to do, or don't have the internal resources to do that.
Right.
But the more you put that work in, right, the more results you get.
Right.
And I always talk about distributor hours.
Right.
Right? Sales hours. And if you think about it, let's say you're running a direct sales force in the United States with 10 guys.
Yeah.
Each one of those guys is giving you 200 days a year, right?
Sure.
So you're getting 2,000 days, 8 hours a day. That's 16,000 hours. You know that exactly, basically.
Right.
Right now you're working with distributors. You don't know unless you really dig into it. You don't know what you have.
Right.
And you want to do the same thing. You want to say, okay, can I get, can I get this distributor to promise me one person full 1 day a week, right? Can I get this distributor to promise me 3 people, 1 day a week? And you build that up so that you're fully aware of what you're doing, how many hours you're getting, because there's going to be a correlation between the competent sales hours and your sales.
Right.
So the more you can add to the competency and the hours of your distributors, that's how you're going to grow your sales, right?
So running a business, honestly, can leave a lot of founders and operators feeling lonely and isolated. If you have ever felt that way, trust me, I know what it feels like. And there is something you can do about it. You've heard a lot of our guests talk about the fact that being lonely and isolated is one of their biggest challenges in trying to run and scale their business. captainscouncil.com. Go to captainscouncil.com right now and see what we're doing to resolve this problem. We want you to be a strong operator who has solutions and has a way to get around the challenges you're currently facing. What most founders don't understand is that you're not alone. The challenges that you're facing, likely somebody else has already overcome, and they can give you the feedback you need to overcome them. Who better than your peers, other founders, other operators who are joining with you in a small group setting, a global community setting, as well as at our in-person events to guide you through these challenges that you're facing right now. Don't give up, keep on pushing, but do it with some good advice from your peers. Go check it out at captainscouncil.com and let me know what you think about the offering. We can't wait to see you there. So when you get a new client opportunity and you're looking at kind of the opportunity that they might have to go international, how frequently is it that like, oh yeah, this is totally doable? And how frequently do you say, yeah, this is going to be a tough one. This is a pretty American product. You know what I mean?
Sometimes it's a very American product. I mean, if you come to me with, and I typically don't do a lot of consumer goods.
Yeah.
But, peanut butter, right? Like, nobody likes peanut butter. Peanut butter is a very American thing, right? So I'm not sure I'd want to be in the business of exporting peanut butter, for instance, just as an example.
Isn't that so weird, though? It's so good. Anyway.
Oh, it is. I
digress.
But when you're dealing with like widgets, when you're dealing with, let's say you have a machine part or something or something that's being used in all over the world, you basically look around and you say, okay, where do they use these things, right? Or medical devices or, stuff like that. A lot of those things now, very often, if a guy comes to me and he says, well, I have a software product, we're not changing the language, it's only going to work in English.
Right.
Probably it's not going to work in a lot of places.
Probably.
Right?
Yeah.
But if they're selling well in the U.S. now, and very often, a couple of times a year, somebody will approach me. I'll say, look, I'm not going to be able to help you out, or they want to do it. Very often people say, well, I have a scented candle. I want to sell my scented candles all over the world. And it's like, well, really, is there that much value in an American scented candle to ship it to Japan?
Probably
that kind of thing. But business to business stuff that sells well in the U.S.
Yeah.
Well, because we make quality, we still do make quality products. If we're still manufacturing it here in the U.S., it's typically a quality product.
Right.
And usually there's going to be a market for it. I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but certainly 90% of the time I'll figure out where to sell it, right?
I totally agree. Now, when you approach these companies or when a company approaches you, what does that process look like? Is it to your point, a lot of them probably come in and say, well, yeah, I need to be in Mexico because I vacation there all the time and I talk to people and they, blah, 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 blah. But like, how do you keep a pulse on kind of where in the world would their better clients be than Mexico?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what, sometimes I talked to this guy a while back and he said, I need some help getting into, and he named 3 specific countries. And I said, would you be open to the idea of taking a step backwards and spending a day really workshopping what would be the right market?
Right.
And he looked like insulted. He goes, no, that's going to be the right markets. That's where I want to go.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I can help you mechanically to get in, right? I can do what it takes.
Right.
But we're going to judge me on my results, right?
Right.
And I'm not sure those are the right markets for you to be spending your money and getting into. Or would you be open to revisiting this? And he was just totally closed to the idea.
How funny.
So sometimes I get people like that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I was at a trade show last November, and I talked to a bunch of different people, but I talked to two guys back to back. And I talked to one guy, and he said, Zach, I've been doing this 17 years. I'm telling you, there's absolutely nothing I can do that I haven't done before, and I've done everything I can to increase sales. There's no way to increase the sales of my product. And then I talked to a guy a few minutes later, and he said, Zach, I've been doing this 17 years. I've used up all of my ideas.
Yeah.
I need to keep growing. I need somebody to help me with new ideas so I can keep growing.
Right.
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 So that's two totally different ways of looking at the same problem.
100%.
Right. So yeah, I get that. Very often I talk to people, and to some extent, when I talk to people, they're saying, well, you're telling me you can do my job better than I can, and they get insulted. Right. And
Sure.
they're sort of right. And I have to say, look, here's the thing. You've been doing a lot of other things. You have a lot of other stuff on your mind. This has been my primary focus for 35 years.
Right.
But very often people come to me from link. About 80% of the money I make is from people who come to me and they say, Zach, I read your book. I'm following you on LinkedIn. I've been following a YouTube channel. I've been following your content. It's really great.
Yeah.
And now I'm ready to engage with you. Right. And that's about 80% of my clients are like that.
That's
and then,
nice.
Very often. Yeah. But what I find is I'd like to be able to, personally go and talking about scaling up. I reach out to people and it doesn't always, very often when I reach out to people, they're like, well, why do you think you can do my job better than I can? Right.
Yeah.
And that typically is the conversation I end up having,
Yeah. Well, it makes sense to me. I mean, it makes sense that that's the conversation you're having. I think that it's funny though, because so many American owners, they have such little exposure to operating outside the U.S. And when you take a guy who's lived outside the country for 30 years, as an expat doing these types of things, your mind is so wired differently. I've spent a considerable amount of time in Asia. And so I'm with you. Most people don't understand the dynamics of operating internationally. And so I have to say that your model inspires me because I think that you're providing such a valuable resource to companies that just want to exit and move on. And then you're providing this huge value in saying, holy cow, the international marketplace is not very American outside of America.
Right.
And so understanding those buying patterns, understanding those marketing, tactics and things like that is so valuable. What are some common mistakes you see in addition to just the naivety?
So very often, I'll tell you what. So I look at it like there are 4 pieces of stuff that I work on, right? It's like targeting the right markets, and we talked about that.
Right.
There's finding the right distributors, and very often people don't think about what they really need from their channel partner, right?
Gotcha.
So they choose the wrong channel partners, and then very often. So for me, it's all about the engagement. I want to do everything I can to make my channel partner want to sell my product as much as possible. Because if he's engaged, he's going to drive up his competency. If he's engaged and competent, he's going to sell more, right?
Right.
So very often people don't think about that. They say, well, the distributor is my customer. As long as he sends me a check once a year, I'm happy. I don't really care what he does.
Crazy.
And that really keeps sales down.
Yeah.
then systems, a lot of people have fantastic systems for their US sales organizations,
right?
But they don't have good systems for their international, because they say, well, I'm working with distributors, so I can't really forecast, or I can't get them to use the CRM, or I can't do this. So they really don't have good RevOps.
Yeah.
And RevOps is a big part of driving up sales.
Obviously.
So if you can tighten up your RevOps, and a lot of people just sort of walk away from that. They say, well, for the international markets, I can't put in place the same systems I have in the US. So we're just going to ignore that.
It's crazy.
And then finally, there's what I call cross-cultural selling. It's understanding the customer and understanding. So let's say maybe you have 3 regional sales managers around the world.
Right.
Very often people will say, well, I had two potential candidates for, being my sales manager for the Middle East. One of whom's an American expat who lives there, and the other one's an Egyptian.
Right.
But I really like, the Egyptian, I found him to be really rude. And the American, well, I could see going out and drinking a beer with him, so I'm going to hire him.
Yeah.
But you don't know if he really can sell, or if he knows the language, or if he knows the territory and all of that.
Totally.
People do that a lot.
Yeah.
And I say that having been an expat myself and being a regional sales manager all over the world. Nowadays, I always say, pick somebody local.
Yeah.
It's a little bit harder, but usually it works out better.
Right.
And really try and understand the culture of the countries you're working in, and what motivates your salespeople, what motivates your customers.
I was going to say, really focus on how the buying patterns and how they buy is different than what you're used to.
Exactly. And I'll tell you something, like, I'll give you the example I like to use a lot. So let's say even in Europe, even with white Christians, people, who we should be really comfortable with, Scandinavians and Italians have really, really different business culture.
Yeah.
Right? They think differently. They're motivated differently. They spend their money differently.
100%.
Right? So understanding that. Now, let's say you're dealing with 25, 30 cultures, right? You're getting on a plane and you're meeting with somebody in England, and then you're meeting with somebody in Saudi Arabia, and then Pakistan, and then Japan.
Right. All
these different cultures, you have to keep them straight. You have to negotiate with people. You have to build rapport with them.
Totally.
And that very often is very difficult for people, right?
Oh yeah. No, it's so different. In fact, I'm always shocked. And sometimes you think that these countries are so close that they're all just going to be the same. Every European country is the same.
Right.
Every Asian country is the same. Having lived and operated out of multiple Asian countries, I can tell you, every 30-minute flight, you're dealing with a whole different pattern of everything.
Exactly. And you can mess that up. Like, everybody has a story of making some kind of a mistake that cost them a sale, right?
I love it. So now, earlier in your days, I want to get down to the roots here. Who is it that kind of inspired you to jump into this whole world of internationalism and operating international to begin with?
So I'll tell you a funny story that I didn't tell this story for decades, and recently I wrote it in my book, and I've talked about it. So when I was a kid, I was really, really dirt poor. I lived in a trailer in rural Pennsylvania.
Nice.
And my heroes, I don't know if you remember the old cartoon Johnny Quest. There was like a young boy whose father was a scientist, and he traveled all over the world. And I thought, wow, that would be so cool to travel all over the world.
Right.
And I thought, okay, how do I do that? Right. And you think, well, I don't know that I could be a pilot. I'm not going to be like a professional athlete or whatever. And I thought, but if you sell and you sell well enough,
right,
companies will want to send you places, right? You just have to get good enough at it.
Yeah.
And that was sort of my my starting point. And I said, if you can sell if you can sell something in Pennsylvania, why can't you sell the same thing in Rwanda, right?
Right.
And I ended up, just getting an opportunity to travel around and work for companies selling.
Cool.
And I leveraged that. So that was sort of how I started the whole thing.
I love it. Now, who's your shout out? Because I'm curious how this relates to what you're doing, and I love to ask people who kind of inspires them to keep on doing what you're up to.
So, you know what? I'm going to go in a slightly different direction.
All right.
Because I thought a little bit about this, and a lot of the people that I do interact with are pretty. They get a lot of shout outs because they're like, again, they're sales thought leaders, and we sort of, spend a lot of time talking to each other. But I'll tell you what, I work with a time management coach named Jeff Klubeck. You can find him on LinkedIn. And what I found was, I love keeping myself disciplined and working for myself. I found it was really helpful to keep a time management coach who helps, because I start every day at about 5 a.m. and usually I'm working till about 6 or 7, and I try and time myself into 25-minute increments all day.
Good for you.
And keeping that running smoothly requires a little bit of help. So I'm going to shout out to Jeff Klubeck.
I love it. That's a fantastic shout out. Thank you for keeping him organized, Jeff. That's awesome. No, this is a huge deal. I find that everybody who I have on the show has someone who kind of helps keep them aligned with what they're intending to do. And so I appreciate the shout out. And for all of you listening, I want you to realize the lessons learned in this interview are pretty powerful. A, there is a world outside of America or where you're from that is eager to buy your product and service very often. It's rarely that you're servicing only one type of person. Those type of people are in every culture. So think of that. Secondly, I really think that there's some value in thinking outside the box and understanding that other people outside of yourself and your own team that have an understanding of where they might be able to help you take and grow your business outside of your own company. Look to those people, lean on those people. Honestly, I really appreciate you, Zach, for being here today. Your insights have been super powerful, and I think it's going to affect a lot of our listeners. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Todd.
I hope that was everything I told you it would be. I thought that was a fantastic interview, super enlightening for those that have never worked international. And honestly, what a great guy. I mean, Zach is a great guy, great business leader, great business founder, and he knows and understands how to take brands international in a way that most people don't. There's a lot of great expats, but what he's been able to do and the reason he's doing it is a great thing to be thinking about. Definitely check out his content, check out what he's up to, see if he's a good fit for you and your business growth, and I think he might be. For those that are looking for other help, that feel like you're all alone in your growth journey, you don't have to be. There's people like Zach, there's people like lots of other founders just like you, even hitting industries that you hit, that are here to help each other. We call it the Captain's Council. I highly recommend you check it out. It's a community of other founders and operators who are doing exactly what you're doing, trying to figure out the next stages of their growth and scaling journey. If that's something that you feel like you could use some pure advice on, without going to your employees and without going to your board and hearing them, letting them hear you nervous about your growth journey, come to the council, be a part of it with us. We are there to help at captainscouncil.com. Check it out. And we look forward to catching you on our next episode of the Growth and Scaling Podcast. We'll see you then.